Very abrupt change of pace now. We're going to look at project management. And I look around, I think most people here have had experience with the military engineering and the project management side, be it construction or equipment. When I look back, I have very fond memory of some very impressive project managers. When I look at what's going on in the local area, things like the construction of pedestrian bridges across the aviation parkway, you wonder how project management can seem to be so difficult in some areas. I started to learn project management back in fourth phase in Chilliwack in about 1966, way back when. Part of our course there was taught by Merv Largoody, and we learned something called arrow diagramming. And arrow diagramming was introduced as this new tool that had recently been used in the United States for the Polaris missile program. And then we proceeded to design or plan the construction of a two-car garage. And I think that two-car garage probably continues to this day. But nowhere did anybody say, oh, and by the way, we just finished building the Diefenbunker, one of the first applications in Canada, in the Army, using that particular network analysis, arrow diagramming, program planning and control technique. Never heard of that at all. I personally was not aware of it until we started writing volume 3. And you dig into the work that was done out in CARP to build the Diefenbunker. Incredible challenges, incredible timelines, incredible engineering challenges. People didn't know how to design a bunker against near nuclear explosions in those days. They were designing it as they were planning the construction. They didn't know what was going in it until they were well on in the construction. An incredibly challenging construction program. This evening, we're privileged to have Dave Noble. Dave is recently very interested in the Diefenbunker. It combines a number of hobbies that he has: research, photography, engineering, and he's really digging into it. Tonight we're privileged to have Dave speak to us about his awareness of what went on in the construction and planning of the Diefenbunker. Dave.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everybody. Just as a starter, can I ask just for a show of hands, who's actually toured the Diefenbunker oh, excellent. And some of the photos I'll show you, you will recognize. This was supposed to be called a short ramble through history. I've already been edited down 20% therefore, so that's good news. Cut this back a bit. Just another interesting connection. Ken mentioned it was difficult to draw a thread amongst the presentations, but Jerry, of course, and I were in 2CR together when I had the honor of being a commanding officer back when it was a fairly small unit. George was with us there. Great times. And my first phase of training was in 1966, first phase officer cadet, and in that era, the Army every year sent all their first phase cadets to a school. It could have been the Armored Corps School, it could have been infantry. In this case, the year I went to a Service Corps School in Borden. All the Army first phase cadets, which included the RMC cadets and the CME cadets. So there's an interesting mixture right there. But at that time, there were still Service Corps apprentices in the same barrack area where we were. And I think they wore yellow tabs. I'm trying to remember the Service Corps. So there was the little yellow monsters across the parade square. And we wore the white ones, of course, as officer cadets. And there was always a little bit of antagonism, but we never actually met in any sporting or other arena. The Diefenbunker. I was going to show in the next slide, and I won't advance it just now, a very short video of about 4 minutes. Was done just a few months ago. I was approached by senior journalism students at Carleton who had somehow heard about the project I was doing, which was in the paper in February, if you happen to see it. And they wanted to do, as part of their graduation challenges, a documentary. And we filmed one out there. It's on YouTube. probably will be posted to the same site these presentations are. But in short, I started in the Diefenbunker, put my name forward as a volunteer last summer with the City of Ottawa Volunteer Cadre. Offer came up to work in one of 4 or 3 community museums, of which Diefenbunker was one. And the job was to go in and help them rationalize, verify the transfer of their archival database from one application to another, from MS Access to a tailored archival database. Fine got me inside. I started playing in there, and the place where we worked on the computer with the database was right inside the archives storage area. And after 30 minutes of mind-numbing verifying fields, you'd stand up and open a few drawers, have a look through some old documents, and the bug went from there. I shortly got disinterested in database validation and very interested in the construction of the bunker. And in going through, one of the key articles which actually fed that was by Dave Peters, and who was, we passed several lives together, Dave and I, in the military, then in the emergency management. Dave as a Fed, myself as a provincial, and then finally now with the Diefenbunker. I'm also cautious of what I say because Dave will, is probably better positioned to give me correctly. Frank Dewsbury, in a similar post-army vein, went into public works and did a lot to do with shelters and survival construction. So there's a lot of other circles at play here. Let's see if we're okay. What is the Cold War Bunker? Now known as the Cold War Museum. It's one of 11 City of Ottawa community museums. It's not a national museum like the War Museum or Science and Technology. It's somewhere in the lower echelon. Lives from grant to grant. Tries to get a lot of people through the doors to subsidize their efforts. It's an artifact of the Cold War period. Unlike many museums, it's not the collection inside that is the artifact, it is the building itself. There are other artifacts inside which Dave Peters was principal in collecting from across the country. When the building was decommissioned as a military establishment in 1994, CFS CARP, D&D, contrary to, I understand what were some agreements at the time, took everything out. Everything almost except the light bulbs. So everything you see when you go through the Diefenbunker now, in the medical center or in any other area, has been recovered from somewhere else across the country. It's the same vintage, it's the right type of equipment, just actually wasn't the original one. What is important and what I'm trying to focus on right now, and a little bit of research and hopefully writing, is the source of many engineering innovations in its design and construction. And frankly, it is an engineering marvel in the way it was conceived, how it was designed, how it was put into operation, and the time scale in which it was done would just water your eyes in today's project management world. This building was posed in 3 months. Ground was broken about 2 months later. It was finished a year and a half later. Yeah, exactly. Let's try again. Is it working? This one's working. This is the video. I won't show you.
The fight never came to Canada, but the country was still at war. It was the late 1950s. The world was under nuclear threat as the United States and the Soviet Union battled in an arms race. Canadian Prime Minister Diefenbunker created a bunker to keep his government and their families safe.
My name's Dave Noble. I'm originally a volunteer with the bunker for the last 6 months. And in the course of doing that, came across some interesting material that I wanted to follow up with more research and perhaps writing.
The goal was to organize the Diefenbunker's database. Now, Dave Noble is on a hunt for the holy grail of history.
So when I was working in the archives doing the database reconciliation, which is a fairly mindless job staring at the computer screen, take a break, look around the archives, and started to find engineering material that was tied to the design of the bunker and the proposals to make it. And I looked into that more and more and spent actually more time doing that than what I was supposed to be volunteering for. And found that there was a lot of material there, but there was equally some stuff that was missing. And the material that was missing that I found most intriguing was the actual design that built this place as opposed to the proposal.
Noble has researched every room in the bunker and knows all of the design features.
I mentioned on the pillars, these are the pillars, the main pillars that are every 15 or feet or so, which support the roof and therefore the load. You'll notice they're all got black stripes on them, vertical. The intent of that was part of the design aspect to make the hallways look taller than they actually are. I had probably 40 contacts to follow down. And they fall into about 3 groups. One is people who actually worked on it. I've also made contact with direct family members of people who worked on it, and in a couple of cases, 2 of the senior engineers. And thirdly, just the engineering community in general have lots of interwoven networks.
Then, Noble took his hunt above ground.
I've learned a lot about archival research. It was a mystery to me before, no reason I should have known about it, but you have to get into resources like the one behind us here, Library and Archives Canada, and similar both across the country and indeed around the world, and learn how to, first of all, request information, because that's an art in itself, and then to have the opportunity to sit down and look through all these archival documents. Fascinating stuff.
Sometimes, the search can seem like a wild goose chase.
Interesting phenomenon of doing the circles. As you contact one person, they refer you to 2 more, and you contact them and they refer you to 2 more. And you have to sort of phone each one or contact each one, see if, first of all, if they're interested, because if they're still around, if they're still willing to communicate, and then what do they know, what do they perhaps have in their hands that they didn't realize was a little bit of history. That's been very interesting, actually, how I called it the 7 circles of Kevin Bacon. Eventually you find somebody out there who did have something to do with the Diefenbunker, and it's interesting to track that down.
The holy grail of history could be anywhere, even in someone's attic. Dr. Andrew Birch is a historian at the Canadian War Museum. He says sometimes archives can get lost in the process. Documents go through many hands. First, whoever makes the document decides if it's important. Then, it is sent to businesses that are interested in the piece of history. Finally, it arrives at the National Archives.
So there's all sorts of stages along the road where something can be deemed to be of historical value or not. So it's not surprising that some things slip through the cracks.
This is a historical mystery. Noble won't stop until it's solved.
But maybe it's out there rolled up in somebody's basement and they just don't realize what it is. That's kind of what I'm hoping. It's kind of a faint hope, but we'll work on it.
For the 25th hour, I'm Laurel Sally.
Just very briefly, the points I'll talk to, just to remind you what the Cold War context was at that time. A little bit of terminology, because there were many terms that were thrown around that were generally associated with emergency government, but I just will specify them. What was our continuity of government program? I believe you'll be surprised. You might have seen bits and pieces of it in your careers. You'd be surprised at how broad spread it was and how rationally developed it was. The Diefenbunker, some factoids drawn heavily from Dave's article and a few other documents I've dug up. Something to do with the construction of it, and just conclude with what I'm doing in terms of research and some other connections that we'll be able to refer you to. The Cold War context. The more I started looking into this, the more intriguing and daunting it must have been at the time. Churchill visited North America in 1946. He was an ex-prime minister at the time. He gave a speech at a university, I believe in Missouri, I'm not sure where it was, can't recall. Used for one of the first times the term the Iron Curtain, and made other Churchillian comments about the Soviet Union in that speech. Interestingly enough, of course, he had a lot to do with creating that because of the post-war reparations and the agreements that were made, but he didn't want to go into that topic at the time. From 45 to 64, the nuclear club was formed and then became a non-use treatment. Warsaw Pact founded in 55. 1957, Strategic Air Command initiated 24/7 flights, which went on for decades after that. 59, the Cuban Revolution. I mention this because Canada at this point was doing the diplomatic high wire dance between our relationships in the Caribbean, Mexico coming in the back door asking us to maintain relations with Cuba, the United States with its well-known position on Cuba at the time and almost to this day. So some of the material I did happen to find in archives showed dramatically the little tightrope, the knife edge that our diplomats were walking to keep everybody happy, but continue to advance Canada's trade and security goals. 1960, the U-2 shot down in Russia and Soviet Union. 61, the Bay of Pigs. 62, the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which we played a large role. And from 51 through 57, the initial activation of the 3 radar warning lines across Canada, Pine Tree, Mid-Canada, and Dew lines. So our policy. This actually, again, it's a pleasure to read some of the old Hansard and some of the documents for the clarity of speech and the clarity of purpose. God help us, I wish we had that today, because there's no baffle gap surrounding this stuff at all. In 57, there was a report to the Prime Minister at the time on civil and military preparedness. If you look at that date and look back to the Cold War context, you can see the concerns that would have driven it. And Prime Minister Diefenbunker made a speech in Parliament in August 1958, and I don't know if it was the actual Parliament or a committee of the whole, what the organization was, but it was him speaking in Parliament. And his words are very clear. These are direct quotes. If a major war occurred, this continent would likely be under nuclear attack, heavy attack. Our main planning efforts concentrated on continuity of effective civil government. Course of reality demands that we be able to assure the people that should nuclear war come, government, well, that's my 20% cut. It's off the bottom of the page there. Government will continue. Again, over 2 pages of Hansard, strikingly clear context. It included also the initial, what we would now call emergency functions of government, were designated at this speech to all the different departments. Just very quickly on terminology, you do see in the papers some loose reference to these terms, and just to make your evening complete, Project Bridge was the actual construction of both the Central Emergency Government Headquarters, Diefenbunker, and the ultimately 6 across the country, which some of you would surely know, Nanaimo, Penhold, Shiloh, Borden, Balcartier, and Quebec, Nova Scotia. Those were meant to be 10, all the provinces. That never happened for principally financial reasons. Each of those headquarters, the 1 here and the 6 across the country, also had communications antenna sites associated with them, typically remoted away from them. And in the case of the one here, caused something like 60 miles of underground cable to be constructed out to those antenna farms at the time. Project Bridge was meant to be obviously highly secret. If you've ever been to CARP, there are not too many secrets there, and it was even a smaller town then. And I have a clip later on, I'll show you, not a clip, but a photograph of the newspaper article, which was done roughly 3 weeks after ground was broken. And it said, emergency government headquarters moving into town. So, blew that one. They came up with another name called EASE, Project EASE, which was for Experimental Army Signals Establishment, and that was what was used from then on. That's what we're putting there. The Army of Office will go in and do communication things. A bit prescient because that's what it served most of its life as CFS CARP, pretty much. Operation Rustic was the federal operation plan by which government would move, which signals were detected, warnings were clear. It was time to move the government to Diefenbunker and around the country to the various other facilities. And exercise Toxin, there was Toxin and Toxin 2, I believe, were run in around the 61, 62 in that area, where this was actually practiced in large scale. In subsequent years, as Dave Peters has done with Emergency Preparedness Canada, the plans were kept in place. The facilities were available in the bunker right up till its decommissioning. Whether the appetite was there in government to do that or not is, of course, another question altogether. So those are some of the terms that I came across, not always used the way that it was intended. The Continuity of Government Program from 1960 should go on to 1994. When the whole process was stopped. You've all seen bits and pieces of this, either in a construction engineer role or in your other government jobs. The Central Emergency Government Headquarters is the Diefenbunker, right here in Carver. It had, as I said, remote communication sites, about 60 miles of underground cable buried either along railway rights of way or through farmers' fields, with antenna farms at either Richardson, which is down near Smith Falls in Perth, or Dunrobin and Almont, just along the river. And you can still see vestiges of those sites up there now. There was something else called Central Relocation Units. There was 6 of them within 150 kilometers of Ottawa, upwind. You can still see vestiges of those in Carleton Place, and I believe in Kentville. If anyone goes to Carleton Place, just for Highway 29 and McClure Avenue meet, There's a big, looks like an oversized H hut right there. That is the formal central relocation unit, which had elements of self-sustainment and self-protection in the basement. There was originally 10, but ultimately 6 were built of the regional provincial government headquarters across the country from Nanaimo through to Debert. Debert, I think, is still the only one that has some operational capacity because they're trying to run it as a museum and a local enterprise as well. The rest have all been dug up, rubbled, or buried. In fact, shortly after I left the Army and joined the Alberta government in emergency management, in 93, 94, we went to Penhole to close it out because it was being decommissioned along with all the warning sirens. And we found all kinds of interesting old maps and phone books and so on stuck in the war center. One of the things that was taken out of there was the CBC studio, which is a part of every one of these. And the CBC was called in, it was still their property. And of course, there's all these big platters and boom mic that looked like Russian television and you know, a map to show where the fallout was. And the CBC folks said, wow, and they took it out, stripped it out, put it in, and it ended up in the foyer of their main studios in Edmonton. It's this sort of snapshot in time of an old radio studio. All those buildings, the Penhold one was kind of interesting. There was some rumors that a bike gang was trying to buy it so they could stronghold themselves and say, you cannot get into these things if the person inside does not want you to get in and grow whatever medicinal stuff they were planning. That was headed off. The other ones were rubble, destroyed, filled with water. All of them had recommunication sites associated with them. There was equally one, which I haven't seen too many pictures of, a regional relocation unit which would have supported the Borden site in the same way these supported the federal ones and provincial ones in Orillia. And a number of other zone emergency government headquarters across the country from inner BC across to Sydney. And these are meant to be, as you pushed out towards the provincial government, and there are many of which are organized regionally, this would provide a similar function, all with a lesser degree of protection, less degree of capacity. And finally, down to the municipal governments, which have their own emergency operations centers, and federal departments out there with emergency roles. We lived all this when we were in emergency management. We still had 200-bed hospitals out there that were stored in people's municipal basements. We had plans to work with our colleagues in the EPC on developing those plans and continuing to test them, again, without any particular political interest or support. So that was the structure, rather widespread and put in place in a very short period of time. As I put in place, I mean constructed. Here in the bunker, there was a capacity of just over 500 people, rated at 535 is the usual figure in the Diefenbunker. There was an approximate split of half and half. They argue with the figures, but that's close enough. Half being the government personnel who were continuity of government, continuity of constitutional government, war cabinet, 20 departments with representatives there, and everyone with a steno. That's the days of stenographers, right? All assigned office space, accommodation, meeting space. 2 suites in there, so-called. I'll show you a picture of one later on. One for the Prime Minister and one for the Governor General. That was the only one that had a self-contained washroom. Everything else was either 1 or 2 bedroom beds, rooms, or gang accommodation. You'll see a picture of some of that later on. 20 agencies there, all with their deputy ministers or equivalent representing there. Governor General had to be there for the continuity of constitutional government so that this element could operate legally within our Constitution at the time as government. Then we had another roughly 250 who were obviously the huge military telecommunications component, but also the people that actually ran the facility. The building mechanical systems, the air fitness systems, to be closed in up to 30 days. Think of that. So all the power, light, water, waste, food, and so on and so on, all that we managed internally in a closed down capacity. So some of the functions that we found that you will find in there, and you will see if you do a tour. As you come in the main door, there's a decontamination facility because they had made what they could, the necessity they could at the time of the likelihood of radiation and when it would occur. A shower facility, you had to walk through there, shower off your clothes, put them in a chute, shower again, get into some sort of coverall, and go to the medical center, which is right next door, and be presumably Geiger, and either sent outside or back for another shower. I don't know what the process was. As I mentioned, there was suites for the Prime Minister and the Governor General, bedrooms for the ministers, a bunch of group accommodation, which was very, very close, as you'll see in a minute. And then we get to the factoids, I'll give you more information, but this was roughly 100,000 square foot over 4 stories. So it's about 157 foot square facility over 4 stories. Huge concrete walls, reducing that inner capacity significantly. A lot of the space taken up with the mechanical systems and the operational aspect, not leaving a hell of a lot for people to sort of live. So one of the medical facilities there is a lockdown room where people who, I saw someone comment on the irony of this. If people went a bit bonkers inside because they were closed in and didn't know what was happening outside, what would we do? We'd put them inside an even smaller room and lock the door, right? Yeah. Medical center, which was complete but small. CBC radio studio again there. At the bottom, the facility services management and the Bank of Canada vault. And if you had a tour, you've seen the Bank of Canada vault. This is separate from the main structure, connected at the lowest level, connected by a tunnel, which is all built to the same standard. And it was where Bank of Canada's bullion was going to go to preserve the currency after the big boom. And it has a massive door, we'll show you in a second, with 6 combination locks, Ocean's 11 type theme challenge. And then a little small vault beside it in the wall, which has an opening ultimately about 8 or 12 inches. And I cannot figure out what that one is for, except maybe once a week they hand out the grocery money. And someone goes out, and gets grocery for the next week. I have no idea what that was meant to do, and I haven't been able to discover yet. Perhaps they can illuminate this. But operationally, I can never figure out how this is going to happen. You just don't move this volume of gold like that. So, and the warning estimate already were that there would be a warning. The stage warning was not going to happen, because there was 3 levels of alerts in the plans. Everyone was going to pick up and go as soon as they got a sniff of likely conflict. So what was this Bank of Canada vault actually going to do? Haven't been able to find that. That's one of the little things out there that's hanging around that I'd like to search on a little more. Picture of the site. Just very briefly, I'll try and orient you here. This is the entrance where everybody comes in here. This facility covers the blast tunnel entrance, it's called. The blast tunnel actually runs all the way through, and this is the other exit. This was one of the design features in that it was anticipated that if there was a blast further nearby, the effects would go right through the tunnel, in one end and out the other. And the main doors to the bunker sits roughly in a square here. The main doors are at right angles, so the plan was that the blast effect would basically bypass the main doors. This entrance down here is a garage in which they were going to put a couple of vehicles, a bulldozer to clear the debris off the helicopter landing site, perhaps a jeep to take people around when the debris had been cleared. And that itself was also built to the same standard, but totally separate from the facility. There's no access between the two. The various stacks you can see there out of the ground are either air intakes and exhausts for the emergency power systems. In 2 cases, there's emergency hatches for people who, if the main doors are buckled, to get out. Those in themselves, if you've had the tour, are a fascinating concept. They're on the top level, the 400 level, one in each corner, diagonal corner. And it's a big pipe full of sand, the sand being the barrier against radiation. When it was desired to leave by that thing, you pull the lever, sand went down to some cavity in the basement, and you crawled up this thing to see what was left above ground. So there's 2 escape hatches. I'm mentioning that for a couple of reasons, because some factoids. What I'm getting to, I'll mention in a minute about why these escape hatches. First of all, it's designed for 100 psi overpressure from a blast that was thought to be, for design purposes, 5 megaton within 1.1 miles. Why 1.1 miles? I don't know. I don't know why it wasn't 1.5. The idea was that Ottawa would be a target. This place would be protected. It was cut and cover construction in an old quarry out there, a gravel pit. And it was determined through a lot of information from the U.S., particularly the U.S. Navy, who Bureau of Docks and Yards did a lot of research into building structures in nuclear context. that a structure in gravel, a very solid concrete structure in gravel surround, would be more capable of withstanding a shock than something that was hollowed out in rock, such as North Bay. Theory being that the gravel would dissipate the speed of the acceleration wave. So that this whole 100,000 square foot, 25,000 square foot footprint buried into at least 5 feet of gravel all around. As it was, I said 4 stories, 100,000 square feet. In fact, one of those stories was a mezzanine to give a little bit of space in the dining area, so at least there was some break from this terrible constriction. 32,000 cubic yards of concrete, repeatedly up to 45-hour continuous pour. That's something I haven't personally seen, except in Dave's paper. I'm not mistaken, Dave. 5,000 tons of reinforcing steel. This thing has its own magnetic signature, right? And I'll show you a couple of pictures on these construction time of the amount of steel that was in there. All of it had to be grounded, wired off, so that from the beginning, from the very first level, so that the structure could handle its communications facility. 5-foot slab on the roof, with 2 to 3 foot sidewalls. 36 columns. I'll show you in a second. They're the most demonstrable part of the facility when you walk through it, which are, as I said, they're 4.5 foot diameter, going up to 10 foot out where they support the roof slab. Those were meant to be the resistance, the passage of the shock overhead down through. One single entrance, that's all, through that blast tunnel. The Bank of Canada vault, that curiosity I mentioned, meant to accommodate 535 people for up to 30 days. This was meant to be government officials only, no families. The briefing of the people who were fingered to go here was all hush-hush, can't even tell you where we're going, we'll move to Kentville first, then perhaps brought here. And the story is that Diefenbunker himself did not like the idea of being separated from his family, and from that moment on, the context of the whole bunker took a different slide. So, this is some of the structure. I think we're looking sort of east here, so that'll be Carp Road up the back. You can see the vertical beams that are spreading out to support the infrastructure, and just the ever-present, endless rebar in this structure. Just a few aspects about the construction. This is where my interest are now lying, is to trying to describe this in some form of a written publication. The company was called Foundation of Canada Engineering Corporation, or FENCO, out of Montreal at the time. They did have a lot of previous large engineering achievements to their name before this. They since became part of what is now SNC-Lavalin, and then subsequently Aecon. They're part of Aecon, a company that you see doing a lot of horizontal construction. Can't find any archival material in those companies at places I've been able to go to so far. It's another dead end to this one. Proposal was completed in 3 months with a huge number of unknowns. This was a completely new design area, trying to estimate what the effects of nuclear weapons would be. A lot of it from the tests Americans were doing at that time in Nevada and in the Pacific. Construction from 59 to 61, servers from 61 to 94 when it was decommissioned. And I'll just mention Lieutenant Colonel Ed Churchill, Royal Canadian Engineer, was the senior military engineer on the site. The senior member of the Foundation Engineering was a gentleman named Jeffrey. And I only mention those 2 names because when I had a small article in the paper, it kicked out a whole bunch of email responses to me. 2 of them I got back were from the sons, respectively, of those 2 people. Churchill, who says nothing about it, heard about it, but any material. Nice. And Jeffrey's son, I live here in Ottawa. And he said, yeah, we think we have stuff up at the cottage. So we're waiting to hear when the ice goes out, what he's got stored away in the attic in the cottage. Critical path method can make reference to it. An interesting history. This is one of the ones where I have to do some research to make sure I knew what I was talking about. It goes back many years. The version, if you like, the evolution that was used here was what was originally used in the U.S. Polaris missile program, where they had to build a lot of boats in a hurry, very large boats, very new construction. So sequenced, managed construction process was important. On this site, you saw the complexity of that site, lack of space, in bringing of materials at the right times, My take is that probably they were still designing the top floor while the bottom one was being poured. So you'd have to have some sequence that manage this. The challenging engineer part of it, oh, I'm sorry. It was applied to all bridge sites. I actually found a record of discussion of a meeting in BC when they were, Churchill was out there lecturing the locals about how they were going to build their site in Nanaimo. Makes specific reference to you must use critical path method. So it was a mantra. And when, shortly after Diefenbunker was finished, Churchill was hired off to go to Expo 67 and manage the construction of Ile Saint-Hélène. That whole Expo site using very much, he enforced the application over a lot of resistance of the critical path method to build that structure, that whole structure. A lot of unknowns and engineering challenges. Many unknowns on weapons blast and radiation. They're described in some of the reports I've got in very matter-of-fact language. I guess they have to, because how else can you deal with the problem? But the unknowns were huge. And I don't think any of us right now would proceed into this kind of planning exercise with limited knowledge that seemed to be available to them then. A very brave gesture. A lot of stuff had to happen from the beginning, from the first breaking of ground, to be considered for the final building. Where does all this service material go? Where does all this conduit, all this piping, all this wiring, emergency power, bridge light, where does it fit in this very small building? One of the first applications of no-break electrical service to make sure that if we lost power from the mains, that's where it originally came from, that the backup diesels had a spool up time. We're used to this now, it's uninterruptible power sources, but then it wasn't so good, so there was a system of batteries with an AC engine and a flywheel, and then the diesels kicked in. Very innovative for the time. And of course, extended occupancy. One of the books in the archives is called locally the Green Binder, and it's basically the user's manual for the Diefenbunker. It's written by the company, Foundation Engineering, and it sort of says in the opening page, welcome to the Diefenbunker, welcome to the Diefenbunker. You'll be living here for the next 2 years, and here's all the systems you have to learn how to operate. Everything is in this binder. I've scanned a copy of it. Mention very quickly submarine design influences. Apart from the critical path process coming out of submarine design, they also had a lot of input from submarine design, both in the Americas and in Europe, in terms of how do you bring all these building surfaces together. If you think about it, the constriction in space, the space available for service lines is just as restricted here as it would be in a submarine. So that was applied. How do you wire this stuff? How do you make sure you can get to it for maintenance and inspection? They also looked at the psychological aspects of living locked into a concrete box for 30 days. So the whole color scheme inside that place, if you look at what was then very fashionable pastels and so on, was meant to lighten the mind, flips your mind. You'll see the pillars in the hallway all have vertical stripes, painted vertical stripes on them, give the illusion of more height. You'll see that the corridors have lines laid out on them in a lino color fashion to make them look wider than they are. And if you go down to the dining area, which is a mezzanine 4.5, we've got all kinds of gracious pastel colors with a very large huge photograph of Rocky Mountains Lake somewhere. So, presumably you're sitting there listening to the rumbling outside, and the patter of little stones on your roof, you can look at this picture of the mountains in Banff. So there was a lot of submarine design influences brought into this, both in the construction aspect and the psychological aspect. I think that's one area that I'm trying to look at. Okay, I just went down here, just very quickly researched, and a fascinating and a very quick one for me. It's easy to throw something down on paper and say, yeah, this was the first use of CPM. And then I say, first recorded use, first attributed use, first use, do we know this? A lot of the other things I've come across, I've learned to become cautious about making brash statements on paper, even if they're just my papers right now. I've been into a lot of archives, as Ken, the Library and Archives Canada down on Wellington Street's a fascinating place to go to. Director of Heritage and History within the department has a lot of equal records. City of Ottawa, I even found one clipping I'll show that came from Huntley Parish Historical Society, which is the parish at that time around the Carp area. Also had a really interesting poke around the UK archives, which are a really slick tool. If any of you are interested, you've got a couple hours to waste. I caution you now, you will waste a couple of hours, because they got a very good search engine. You throw almost anything in, and they'll pop up their references. Once you figure out what you want, you make an order, and about 3 weeks later, you get a DVD in the mail. All this material been scanned in. Really very impressive. Formed my own email account for this, just so that I can see what we got. I called it cleverly Bunker Facts. And I've had, as I said, a good 80 or 90 concrete 80 or 90 meaningful hits from people who have worked on it, had members worked on it, had some engagement with it. Let me just conclude with a few photographs here. Just to get rid of the jokes ahead, this is not a Diefenbunker artifact. This is actually a photograph that was in the paper when I had a really good article, filled some space, got a lot of coverage out of it. Good website, Diefenbunker.ca, and there is a film on there called The Nuclear Roof. I encourage you to go look at it. It's about 23, 24 minutes. It was created as an indoctrination for people who were going to live there. It described everything from the construction through living in it. The soldiers and the engineers and signalers that were in there. It does a little bit about the burying of the cables out in the countryside. There's some living histories on there in the Diefenbunker site, which are the people who worked in it, mostly of the signals and engineer disciplines who were in the building itself. And of course, they do tours. And the other one is just a blog site I've started and my email. So, just a couple of pictures to close off. The scale really is astounding. I think the scale of the thing and then the constricted space just really is what gets your attention. So this was within a month of ground being broken. This was the Ottawa Citizen. Hence an emergency headquarters for government. Yeah, that lasted really well. So then they called it Project Ease after that. Here we are, Canadian Army's Experimental Army Signals Establishment. And everybody said, right. Anyway, that's what happened, and that was the story, and we're sticking with it. Another design influence from submarines was the use of scale models to make sure everything fitted and to figure out how and when it would go in. This sits inside the museum just now. It's a plexiglass 1 to 40 scale, I believe, of all 4 levels of the bunker. And in particular, of course, up top is not too terribly complicated because it's office and telecom space. Down here is where you get into the building systems, the diesel, the fuel storage, the water storage. And they're always measured out there. And if you look at that film I mentioned, you'll see them poking around with pointers on it. These are old photos from the film days. I haven't had a chance to take myself and take new ones. This was the main entrance that, as I said, ran perpendicular to the blast tunnel. There's main doors on the right, large doors which could bring in larger objects. The personnel on here all had to be locked one at a time, so there was always just one possible opening. These doors, these are back a bit, but they are approximately that deep. Telecom facility, this is obviously a more recent one. You can remember our portable garrison dress that was around in the 90s there. A lot of communication from here to NORAD, but also across the country and around the world. And there it is, the CBC studio. Still there, you can visit that. Monster platters sitting here, reel-to-reel tapes. You can understand why a CBC engineer, even in the 90s, would look at this and say, whoa, boy, I want that in my basement. Dining facility, there's the large picture I mentioned up on the wall. And even here, in the crux in the middle of nuclear war, we had a space for officers, we had a space for senior NCOs, and we had a space for the rest of us. So there are dining areas off to the side. And you'll notice this is quite a bit higher. This is the mezzanine area, so about a floor and a half worth to give some extra space. He's bouncing off Frank's head there. Again, the dining facility, full kitchen. The story was, and it makes a lot of sense to me, that the large walk-in freezers would double up as morgues, as mortuaries when the time was required. If the guys in the medical center were not right up to their game. There we are, 3 layers of bunks at the time. So this is one of the suites. what's called the suite there. He had his little bedroom, his own potty, and a wonderful dial phone. And there's another one, which is somewhat similar. Another aspect, by the way, I was mentioning quickly, the submarine design. A lot of this lights that you see here are shockproof lights. They were directly came out of a submarine lighting manufacturer. So they had little cages on the wall. They pull off the wall. They have an absorb a certain amount of shock. One of the challenges right now for the museum is that it's got to do a lot of electrical work to make sure it doesn't fail code. It hasn't failed code right now, but a lot of the original equipment is getting aged. Because the building is the artifact, they've got to wire behind the scenes and leave the original stuff evident out front. And you can imagine the challenge for an electrical contractor there. This is the whole systems control. So all the ventilation, air movement inside this building, which was timed to move on a lockdown situation so that at certain times of the day it would be in the bedroom area, at certain times of the day it would be in the kitchen area, at certain times of the day in the hallways. The medical area would be under differential pressure so that there was no nasty stuff getting out or in. Quite a complex design, and that's the part I'm writing just now is to lay out those criteria. Briefing room, I call this a cabinet briefing room. That may not be quite the right title, but you can see those are echelon seats with some nice cushy ones up the top, where presumably they would all stare at the map as the latest mushroom cloud appeared on display. Another meeting room used a lot. These are some of the areas of the bunker now being used as an attraction to bring people in and do their company meetings in here. Since then, just again, the operating center manned jointly by the equivalent of emergency measures at the time, military, weather people, not surprisingly. Weather patterns would be critical as to where the radiation was going. Bank of Canada Vault. This is the one I'm really intrigued with. This is the main vault. There are 6 combination locks there. You know, you can just see George Clooney there with the headsets on. Big area, and it's secure. And just off to the right-hand side is that little window on the thing, which I have to nail down. And there's the tunnel, which is probably the most iconic photograph. A lot of this piping, by the way, that you see here has been retrofitted to bring the fire systems up. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. The one thing I got my research gun set on right now are, first of all, the critical path. I found no concrete, sorry, I'm using that expression, no physical manifestation of this critical path except for about a 5-second shot in that film I mentioned to you. It's on the site. You can see them. It's clearly a narrow diagram, and they're pointing at it. It's in very bad light. They blurred out a lot of the details for security reasons. That's the only thing I've seen of it. I've just got this faint hope that there's a rolled up tube in the engineer's son's cottage somewhere in cottage land. And the other one, of course, is the Bank of Canada Vault. What exactly was the plan to make that happen?